Okay, yeah, we are again. Welcome everyone. Everyone well?
Yeah, good, Leon. Good.
Very good, thanks.
Good, good.
Good. Always, every week I ask whether everyone's well. It's always so subdued. So there's a little bit more enthusiasm this week. Okay, so topic for today is around the value of testing and how we measure or quantify the value of testing. So what I mean by that is there are certain mechanisms to measure testing. So you can measure things like how many production defects were there, or how many defects were there before production. Sort of calculate or add do a calculation around what did that defect cost us. But there's almost that immeasurable value that testing brings as well, which in my mind is very difficult to quantify. So had testing not been there at all for this release, would we have been better off, or would we have been the same? It's very difficult, and often there are questions asked around, well, if I needed to increase the size of my team, or I needed to start implementing automation, etc., what's the value of that going to be? So that's what I want us to delve into. Now, I don't know whether anyone wants to have a first stab at this, but what are the different mechanisms to measure the value of testing? So we don't necessarily need to touch on that immeasurable bit at the moment, but just in general, how do we measure whether testing is actually adding value to an organization?
I'll let someone else answer that question, and I want to add a question to your question, right? I think to determine the value of anything, we need to figure out what is the job of that thing, right? What is the function? So what do we do as testers? And I suppose if we can articulate why we are there, maybe we can start looking at the value of having us there.
I'll try and answer Johan's question, then I'll not answer Leon's. So, like, what is a tester doing? Is a question, right? So, like, I think you could argue to help determine quality of something, to prevent defects going live. You could use like, for me, a tester is somebody that is impartially finding the truth about something, right? Because I'm not as invested in the outcome of the thing that you are doing. A developer is invested in the outcome because he's built the thing. The analyst is invested in the BA is invested in the thing because they've written the requirement. The architect has built the architecture out, so they're interested in making sure that it worked appropriately. I'm not part of that process in that same regard, so I am impartially going to tell you what it is like, and I think that's what a tester is doing. If that help answers the first question.
Yeah, I want to add to that, because that's my view as well. About there are many things, find defects but I want to add to that. To my view is that we exist to provide information, and you said that as well, right? So if we exist as testers to provide information about the system and the test, right, then we can start thinking about what value does that information bring. And maybe that steers us into a direction to start answering or think about the value then of testing. Is that then maybe the value of the information that we bring to the table?
I agree with that, Johan. And I'm going to give an ISTQB answer, right? So the reason why we test is risk mitigation. So by identifying and fixing defects early in the process, we reduce the risk of software failure in production. So we do help avoid costly fixes once the bug is in production, reputation damage as well. And then obviously potential financial losses and legal suits as well. So I would say whether we tested and we didn't find defects, at least we have provided the information to say our product is fit enough to be deployed to production. That information is still valuable. Without testing, you would not have made that decision to have the confidence. So if we find defects, still good enough because we have provided you with the information to say you cannot go live. This is going to lead to reputational damage, potential financial losses, and in some cases, so maybe we will look at the different case studies from projects that failed due to lack of testing, and they ended up in legal battles. So I think that is the value that software testing is bringing in software development projects.
So just to throw a span in the works, yeah. So if for the last 6 months you've had a team doing testing, and every release, before the release, the highest severity bugs that they find are low. So there's no critical, there's no highs. Let's say even there's no mediums. 6 months down the line, can you still justify for that testing to happen?
Yes. Because remember, with testing, it's not just about finding defects, it's also preventing them from occurring in the first place. Because we should not just think about testing as dynamic testing. So with that static analysis that we did, those requirements analysis, closing the gaps, finding the if scenarios before we even get to development, that adds value. So I would say not getting high severity defects does not justify the existence of testing. So more reason why we should be there, because we are now preventing them from occurring in the first place.
I'm trying not to play devil's advocate because you could argue you're not finding good defects because your coverage isn't very good, right? Let's park that devil's argument to one side. But yeah, I think to pick up on this and preventative maintenance, why would I keep those testers in that squad when we're not finding any critical problems? Like, because you're not getting any critical problems in production. Like, surely that's a good thing that you're doing that. Why do I get my car serviced? So they can tell me that something will be a problem before it becomes a problem, or catch it before it's a problem. Ooh, you got a bit of wear on the tire. You probably want to change that in the next 2 months because you might have a blowout. I'd rather have them change the tire than have a blowout on the motorway. And that it sounds like that team is doing a good job of that. Potentially, they're preventing you from having that blowout, that production incident, or a high level defect by being there. So why are they there? Because they're doing a good job. That's what I would argue.
Yeah, I think, Leon, I think that touches a little bit on being very careful what metrics you use when you measure the value of testing. There's a term called pesticide paradox, like saying, if you keep on testing a certain area, eventually you find less and less defects there, but it does not mean that in the next release there won't be something. It depends which area is touched or fiddled in terms of the software. So definitely if you find less and less defects, yes, it's a good sign. It means stability in your code. But as we all know, software keeps on evolving, and does not mean we can just assume the next time nothing will happen. So we need to be careful which metrics we use to just start saying, okay, testing is done, we can spend money on something else. That's usually, that speaks to regression testing, and regression testing should never go away. We provide that peace of mind. Even if nothing goes wrong, it's a good thing, and you still need to test it every time something new goes into production.
I think another thing I would add is where the other voice in the room. So the business is all clapping themselves on the back for doing a great job because we've gone live, everyone's doing a good job, it's great, let's just keep going. The testers are often the people in the room that are going, have we thought about that? What about this? This could happen. How are we getting that? Often a project is so focused on going live that they won't consider some of the potential negative aspects of what they're doing. So a tester can have that difficult job of being a bit of a naysmith, and that's an important thing to have in a business, not just on a squad, but at all levels of the organisation. You need someone who can feel empowered to question an assumption or a way of thinking and go, have we thought about this as an alternative, or have we thought about the impact of that? And testers have that mindset generally. So that's why another reason why I think they're useful to keep in an organisation at all levels, not just on squads or teams.
So Stefan, to go back to your comment about looking at the wrong metrics or measuring the wrong things. So what are some of the things which are good to measure to show the value of testing?
Yeah, I think that the whole team can jump in. The obvious one is defect. It is a good one to have, but it shouldn't. Metrics can be viewed on with different glasses. I'm just saying, be careful how you interpret the information. I think before we jump into a few metrics, I think no metric should be looked at on its own. I think you need a lot of metrics, and you need to look at possibly 10 different metrics and holistically then make your assumption of the health of a application under test. So that would be my first comment. But some of those things, some of those metrics obviously would be defect, defect coverage, or defect tracking the amount of defects that's been there, or how often you get defects, the severity thereof. I think test coverage is also, or requirements coverage, those kind of things, just to show, okay, we're actually covering 50% of all the different business requirements. So that gives you some kind of sense of comfort, or tells you where the risks are. Those are maybe just two of them. Maybe the rest of the guys can maybe throw a few in.
Yeah, it's a good start. It's also a question that we get asked very often. And not to steal Steve's answer, he hasn't given it yet, but it depends, right? This favorite answer depends, but it really does. If you go back to the opening second statement to say that we are there to provide information, then obviously provide information to people who care about the information that you provide. So if you're a tester in a squad, then things like coverage and amount of test cases and those kind of things probably more important than reporting to a CIO that I found 40 defects, 30 20. They don't really care. So if our job is to provide information, then the metric that you need to provide depends on the person receiving that. And one of my favorite things is, so what? So if I provide that information to my test lead to say, this is what I've done, this is my clearance throughout this process, and say, oh, fantastic, I can see what we are doing because I know what that information means. If you provide that to a very senior stakeholder and say, like I said, the defect thing, or we automated 40 test cases yesterday, they're going to ask you, so what? So I think it's really important to understand who needs to know what. And that's where testers, experienced testers, are a little bit different than anyone else in that organization, because we figured out what is important through this test lifecycle and who should know what from a metric perspective, so they can actually take that information and do something with it. And the higher you go up in this communication reporting chain, the less you need to provide, because a C-level person will just want to know there's a big risk, we can't do credit card payments, our business will fail. To them, that's good enough. But your test lead will need to know a lot more and then filter that information up. So it depends.
Yeah, I hate to use my default answer if it depends, but that's pretty much where I always go to. But I'll give you a use case example. You can help measure work in progress and technical debt as a tester. You can say, okay, you're pushing through let's say 15 user stories a sprint, but we've noticed that the test pack is becoming quite bloated and difficult to maintain. So we want to advocate for some more automation here, because what we'll see is that we'll become a blocker in your WIP. Testing will slow you down. And for us to help speed you up and maintain the same level of delivery cadence, we want to automate the majority of this pack, as an example. So you can also measure things like that. Or to an analyst, you can help them to measure the quality of the requirements that they're generating or have been provided with. So I can't test this requirement. It's very ambiguous. An example would be something around usability. It's a user-friendly UI. is pretty much an untestable requirement. It's difficult to quantify what that means. So you can help specific people in different agile teams or squads with metrics that are appropriate to them, as an example.
I think with test automation, it's sometimes easier to show value because there you can say, if we have a regression pack of 100 tests, it takes one tester X amount of hours. You can take that, you can turn that into a monetary value. With automation, you can say it runs it in half the time. We can run it often during night or after every release. That's an easy sell. So in that sense, I've found that that's easier or a easier, clearer way to show value. Yeah.
But Stefan, sorry, Mamatla, before you go, but Stefan, even that, I have 500 tests running every day. I've executed this test pack 500 times this month. To some degree, it's a gain. So what? What value is it actually bringing? So yes, it's mitigating risk maybe if you're testing the right thing, etc. But so what?
Yeah.
So what?
Well,
The fact
well,
that I have it running every day and I have so many tests running, etc. Does that show the value of testing?
To me, it does. I mean, if you are fiddling with a piece of code that nobody ever wants to touch because you don't know what it's going to break, and you can run those tests automatically versus having to wait and run it overnight versus having to wait 5 days for somebody to run it manually, yes, that gives you the sense of comfort. It's time to market. I think that value will never go away. We run at that risk of saying, oh, it's passing again. Maybe it doesn't add value. It's adding value. It tells you that the code is doing well. That's why I say don't think that well, in this case, automated testing isn't value because it doesn't pick up values. It tells you that the code is actually doing well, and that to me is just as much. That the value is just as much in that sense. So anyway, Mamatla.
Yeah, I agree. I actually like this question. So what? We've provided you with a metric. Then what? So I just want to, I'm looking at one case study here to say maybe the testing team within Knight Capital Group. So I want to use Knight Capital Group as a case study of a software project that failed and that led the company to be at the brink of being bankrupt, right? So when I did my research is that in 2012, Knight Capital Group experienced a catastrophic software failure due to lack of testing. So it said a simple human error in deployment of deploying software led to the company executing erroneous trades, resulting in $440 million loss within 45 minutes. So maybe somebody in the company provided them with a defect report to say we have this critical bug that we have identified during testing, or they did not test at all. The impact was there was going to be 440 million loss within 45 minutes. So if you give a metric, you also need to give the so what. So if you continue going live, so chances are you're going to lose this amount of money. So I think the so what part when we provide metrics is very important, and that is the only way to show value.
You've just touched on something very interesting there, which is the value of testing can actually differ depending on what you're testing. i.e., if you're testing a heart monitoring device, which is used as part of operations, you making or missing a small defect there is maybe it has a lot more impact compared to testing something which isn't life-threatening. So I said it, but I'm going to ask the question as well. Does the value of testing actually differ depending on what you test?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I would say yes, if it's life-threatening, that is still a problem. But financial loss also, remember, is loss to livelihood. So if a company has employees and as a result of a software bug and the company goes bankrupt, then there's loss of livelihood. So whether it's life or livelihood, there's value in testing.
Mm.
Like, just to think about it differently in terms of, does it add value? Like a question back to the stakeholder when they say, well, so what? You've done all this testing. So what? The question back to them is, what did you get? So then when they go, what do you mean, what did you get? Well, you asked for an application to be built. What did you get? Well, we got an application. Did you? What? How does it work? Oh, it does this. How did you find that out? We tested it. Correct. Without testing, you're not closing the loop, are you? So you've just put something out there and something is made, and without testing, you won't know what you've actually got. Even at a very simplistic level, I've built a chair in my garage. Will it function as a chair? I can only find out if I sit on the chair and test that it works as a chair. So the pushback to stakeholders when they go, so what am I getting? You're getting the answer to the ultimate question of, did I get what I paid for? Did I get what I asked to get built? That's without testing. How else can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fair point. I want to go back to what you said at the start, Steve, which was testers are the only ones that actually look at it from a maybe non-invested or less invested perspective. But
Yeah.
but do you not find with testing shifting left and testing playing a much bigger role in at certain companies requirements creation, but requirements analysis right up front, do you not feel people are becoming more and more invested? So from a requirements perspective stage, maybe if you pair programming with the developer, writing unit tests together, etc., are we losing a sense of that lack of investment, for lack of a better word, with shifting left?
No, I just think we're redefining testing instead of it being it's a phase of an activity that you do in a life cycle of a thing, to it is a process. It is a methodology that you adopt both left and right, not just fully shift left. There's lots of shift right principles that are really good as well to redefine. So I used to say in this, one of the agile squads I worked with was quality is everyone's responsibility, but those responsibilities are different. My job as a tester is to help you understand what your responsibilities are in that, right? And that's how I would explain that. So BA, your job is to try and make sure that the requirements you write are testable, and I'll help you identify how to do that. And you are doing testing by doing that. Right? Even though I'm saying tester as a person or as a single role, testing as an activity or quality assurance as an activity is broader across everyone within the business. And something else testers can do in terms of adding value is get people to think about it that way, and encourage people to adopt testing practices is actually a really good way of adding value, ensuring the worth of testing.
And again, you've now touched on something very pertinent and important, and that is testing is different to a tester. So certain organizations have dedicated testing teams, etc., and testing happens in those organizations for sure. But there are also organizations where they don't necessarily have dedicated testers doing testing, but the function of testing still happens, and the value add is still there. It's probably touching on something that we've discussed before, but how important is it for testers to do the testing in an organization?
I think it's important for someone with a testing mindset to do that. Now, I know that's not answering a question at all, but there's a different mindset when I'm building something and I'm trying to test whether it works. So when Steve builds the chair, he wants to think that he's going to build a solid chair. But the mindset of, is this good enough for my family to sit on? next to the fire so they don't fall in the fire when the chair breaks. That's a little bit of a different mindset that you bring to the table. And I was in a meeting yesterday having a similar conversation, and I made the statement, and we can debate that in a different time, but the only time you are actually testing is when you are using your mind to think. Now, we spoke a lot in other things about testers keeping busy with busy work in terms of test cases and test scenarios and doing all those things. And those things are good, but that's not the testing part of it. As Stephen said, the testing part is analyzing, interrogating, using your brain and your testing mindset to think. So I think someone that wants to call themselves a tester is not necessarily someone that can do all the checkbox things, but it's someone with a mindset of interrogation and understanding and critical thinking. And that usually, if you look at any engineering discipline, it's something that is in you, but it's also techniques that are taught how to actually do those things. And that a tester needs to bring to the table, because a developer, again, can do a lot of testing, and we advocate for developers to do a lot of testing, but it's a little bit of a different mindset that you bring to the table.
And I think I would just add, it's also a question of scale. So if you've got a small in-house development team of, like, say, 10 people and you're producing mobile apps, will you have a bespoke testing team for those 10? Probably not. If you have 1,000 headcount developers, will you need a testing function? I would strongly advocate for that, because it becomes, the bigger you get, it becomes about how do you ensure the quality maintains the same as you scale up and out. And a group of testers can help. Maybe because if you read our book on how Google tests, they talk about the true-blooded testers outside of the development community become about standards of practice, tool sets, methodologies, frameworks. How do we tackle larger problems outside of the individual squads and teams themselves, where a lot of the work is actually done by developers, a lot of testing work is done by developers. So I think that answer is it's definitely a scaling, as part of that answer, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. Skill plays a critical factor when it comes to testing. Yes, I agree. Everybody can test, right? Actually, everybody in software development project should test. So we have the developers doing their unit testing. But remember, the goal for each test type and then each test level, the objective is different. So a developer is looking at a different objective when they are testing. So having the testing team testing, they have their own specific goal. And we also have business people who are doing UAT as well. So they are also doing testing. Now, what differentiates a tester is the skill that they have. So they focus on software testing, which is a skill that is not available in the development team or with the UAT team. So it's like cooking. I cook, you cook, but you're not a chef, you know? So everybody can test.
Wow, you've not tasted my cooking.
But you're not a chef. Why don't you have a restaurant? So it's the same. Everybody can cook, but then can you sell? Can it be commercialized? Is that level of standard? No. So it's the same with testing. If you just put that here to say, yeah, everybody can test, everybody tests, but not everyone is a tester.
Yeah. Stefan, I know you want to say something. I just quickly want to say something, and it might completely distract what you want to say. But that's actually the interesting part. So if you think about everyone's capable of doing testing, and then there are people within a testing discipline and a testing competency doing the testing. So there will be people that argue, well, what value am I going to get by having someone with a tester's mindset and from a testing competency doing the testing over using someone else in the business to do the testing? And I think that delta there, that's what do you get more from a person from a testing background with a testing mindset from that type of competency? What is that additional value that you get from that? I think that's sometimes difficult to motivate.
I think it depends on the skills of the tester, but I think just doing the testing is one thing, but there's a lot of that happens in the background that's value added by somebody that's a professional quality engineer or a tester in terms of setting up test data, setting up test environments. Those are also a lot of things that happen in the background. It's not just somebody sitting down and now everything works and I'm going to test. So I think there's a lot of value add coordinating the testing effort. I know that some of these things might be a bit more in like a test lead or somebody a bit more senior, but in general, a good tester would to be taking ownership a lot of those things, making sure it works. I mean, we've also seen clients recently where they're doing very well in terms of their own areas, in terms of their pods and doing unit testing and API level 2 testing. But like to Stephen's point, so when you grow as a company, now you have multiple silos or applications, string environments together, getting those systems to talk to each other to build proper test environments. That's also challenging, and testing those end-to-end scenarios could also be challenging. Who takes ownership of that? Typically, I haven't seen a lot of developers taking the ownership of doing end-to-end testing and making sure all of that works. Yes, unit testing is their responsibility, but if not, if you don't employ somebody that's dedicated to testing, who takes full ownership of system integrations testing in a big organization? To me, that sits solidly in a senior tester role. Said a few
really
things,
simple,
but
sorry, no, especially your approach on set, because it's to the front of my mind with the client I'm working with. But like one of the examples I've got there would be like I ask different stakeholders. So say I'm talking to a solution architect, and then I talk to the lead developer. I ask this kind of very similar question. And I say, if it's all going to go wrong, where will it go wrong? And the architect will go, I'm really worried about this integration here and here. It's going to be difficult to do. The developer will go like, actually, I'm really time pressured. I've only got 6 developers and I really need 10 because there's some constraints. And the same thing to the BA and the same thing to the PM. And you get a picture of like, oh, these are all the things that are going to prevent this thing from working appropriately and the quality going to be affected. No one really asks those kinds of questions to each other because it's all about doing the do and getting the thing over the line. The test is about knowing what will stop it getting over the line or getting it over the line in a poor condition. So asking those kinds of questions is a real value add that I think people with a tester's mindset, to use that language, will have those kinds of conversations where others won't.
Yeah, and also if you ask a developer to test their code, there will be some bias because how do you mark your own homework? So you won't find defects. And then getting anyone, let's say in the company, to come and test. I have facilitated some UAT, and trust me, if you don't have the passion for testing, if you are not into it, it's just a waste of time because we'll just go there, nudge, people like, okay, can you please just test? I need to get a sign off for UAT. So there is no commitment for testing from non-testers. So as an organization, are you willing to run that risk to say it's just going to be just ticking the boxes to say, okay, testing was done, even though it was not done by the right people. So that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, I've often felt that the real value in testing is in the negative side of testing, because everyone, when they look at something, they go and test whether it works. And let's be honest, most of the time when an application is implemented or released, the positive scenarios work because that's what everyone is considering. That's what everyone has worked towards. But it's that negative side. It's how can I give this application an input which it's not expecting, or how can I do something which maybe it's not been built for? I think that's where the true value lies, and I think that's what Jan was saying to some degree in terms of critically thinking about testing and actually sitting and thinking about testing. It's not just a tick box activity where, oh, I'm going to write some happy path scenarios here and I'm going to sign it off and it's going to work. For me, the value is, and we know this, we've all been in this industry for long enough. Most of your defects you're gonna uncover when you're doing those negative things, when you're doing those things which wasn't in the requirements, which wasn't a part of how it should work. So this is maybe contentious, but UAT for me has always been more of a training activity than it has been a testing activity. Most people from the business just want to see how the system works. They, in most cases, they're running through a couple of happy scenarios, and probably in all likelihood, those scenarios have already been covered in some previous cycle of testing. So the value of UAT for me is more in people seeing the system as opposed to really bringing value in terms of testing. You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry. I was going to come back on the UAT, right? I've got a really good example of how testing can really add value to UAT. So I was asked to assist with UAT of a mobile application for a client, and it was for engineers in the field. And one of the things the application had to do was take photographs of parts of the road and then upload that image. And they had to take 3 photographs. One was like the whole road, one was close up, and then one was like a really close up view. And he said every time he did it, only the 3rd photograph would work. So I'm with him watching him doing it, and only the 3rd photograph would work. And he said, it's just the first 2 don't work. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, the first 2 camera pictures wouldn't work. And then I realized the developer had put a size limit on the size of the image. So when he's doing this big panoramic shot, like across the whole road, it's too big. So the app just goes, it's too big. I won't upload the file. And so the guy said to me, well, how come the developer hasn't spotted that? I said, because he'll be at his desk in his house with his mobile phone, taking a picture of his desk, doing it 3 times, going, uploaded. I said, he's not come to your environment, seen how you work, looked at it and gone, wow, this is completely different to what I expected, and spotted that as an edge case. So like that's an example where a tester's mindset in UAT can add real value to the user, because I needed him to explain to me why he's doing what he was doing, and then me to rationalize, well, hang on, the developer wouldn't even think like that. He would be doing this. And that was an example where that defect would have gone live and prevented the app from being used appropriately.
Sometimes I wonder, like people in testing or people that always stumble on testing, I'm always wondering what's that profile. But in my mind, I always think the real testers out there are the people that used to take things apart and figure out how does this thing work and how do I put it back together? Because that's that real inquisitive mindset that I think testers really bring to the table. That's not necessarily other people's passions, and everybody has a role to play in a company. But I think that's that real inquisitiveness, asking people, and sometimes it can become annoying because you're asking the difficult questions or the things that's ambiguous, and but I think that's the role we play, that keeping people honest and covering the things that we haven't thought of or that they might not have thought of, and not intentionally, but just because, like Mamata said, they're chefs in testing, but we are the Michelin star chefs, right? So Leon, I forgot to mention it in the last podcast, but you asked the question, what was our favorite or the thing that stuck in terms of ISTQB? And you said boundary value analysis. And I wanted to mention, and maybe it dovetails with this conversation, you said earlier people test positively, but the negative testing is sometimes the value that we bring. And even if people think, oh, maybe I should add 1 or 2, the skills that we bring to how to properly test something negatively is also good. So in terms of the boundary value analysis, I read an article in March this year. There was a gas station in New Zealand that all the card payment system failed because it fell on a leap year, and the card system didn't cater for that leap year day. And it must, I don't know how much, but it must have cost an astronomical amount not making money that day. So skills like boundary value analysis is something very simple, but if you had somebody on the team that properly tested those kind of scenarios, would have most likely prevented that from happening. So there's a good value add for you right there.
Yeah, the leap year was a really good example. That's just made me think of another one where it said, so the requirement said available 5 days of the week, and I said Monday to Friday or Tuesday. Like, what 5 days? Why does that matter? I was like, well, because people might not be working on the weekends. So like, that kind of question, just people people that are testers ask those kinds of questions, and I think that's the real value add that you can bring.
I think we sounding like salesmen for testing today, which is fine. Just I think in terms of closing remarks or closing comments, so testing is a way of showing information. That information is to mitigate risk or give you comfort or confidence that something is working the way that it should based on the requirements. I think depending on which application under test you're working on, maybe the value of testing becomes either more or less. I think there's always an element of value, but maybe if you're working on mission critical type systems, it's, yeah, you can't afford to miss anything. You can't afford any small bug that maybe creeps through can have a massive impact. Whereas, I don't know, I'm thinking of if you were to test the website listing properties and there was a mistake there to say it's not a 3-bedroom, it's a 2-bedroom, it maybe isn't the same impact as missing a defect on a heart surgery machine. So I think there is definitely value. It's just it differs. I think what we still haven't really answered is if I'm the head of testing and I currently have a team of 3 or 4 people, but I actually feel I need a team of 8, and I go to my CIO and I say I need more people in my team, and that CIO wants to know, well, what additional value is that going to bring? I think that's still a difficult thing to answer. Yes, maybe we can do quicker releases, but what does that actually mean? What's the how do I quantify what that's actually going to mean and the value it's going to bring? And I don't think we have time to go into that today, but maybe in a next podcast we can delve into that again, because I could completely understand from a engineering perspective, people will see the value in testing. It's more the people that sign off the checks. And let's be honest, testing is always the first thing that gets cut. Why? Because maybe the value of testing isn't necessarily seen. It's definitely not seen on the same sort of level as maybe other roles in engineering. And I think part of that is because it's difficult for us as a testing competency to really showcase the value because it's so difficult to measure.
I would just add it's cut because you need something to test. So you have to have an idea of what you want, and you have to build the thing that you want. If you don't, the 2 things you cut back, you can't cut those 2. You can maybe cut a little bit of what you want, but you can't cut build. So I understand logically why people go, well, I don't need as much testing. I want to build more stuff. So I can do get the logic around why businesses decide that. I don't agree, but I get it.
I think after this conversation, if someone to ask me this question again, my answer would be this, right? So we've said we provide information. So the only way that I can articulate to someone who needs to sign a check that I need more people is to articulate what kind of information they will bring to the table to you as a stakeholder that we're not currently getting. So what is that information? So either we need to provide more information around performance aspects, because that's important, or security aspects. Or if I have 3 more people, I can provide faster information to you that you can get. But starting to try and articulate the value of testing there in a similar way that we do with developers, I think that's maybe where we are going wrong. Because if all we have is information and that stakeholder is happy with the information they receive, then they will never be convinced that they need more. But if we can articulate what extra information you'll get, or how you will get it differently or faster, maybe, if that is important. But we often go to, because we have constraints in the testing world, we go to senior stakeholders and say, I need more people. But to them, they don't see how they're going to get better, faster, more accurate information, and to them it does not matter. So we need to start, if we all agree that it is information, start articulating that information in a way that it makes sense to them, and then you can start having the conversation about fast information, more information, better information. Because if they don't want, if they're happy with the information they get, you're never going to get more people.
Yeah, I would say also before you ask for more people, first look at your processes, how can you make your processes more efficient, and then make use of technology, making use of tools, automation as well. So before you look for people, look for processes, tools that can help you scale your testing effort. So I would say, yeah, if I were to choose between people or technology, I will maybe request more budget for technology that will help testing to be more efficient or effective. So that will be the approach that I will follow.
Yeah, maybe just a last comment. It's once you've defined the metrics to evaluate against, it's always a good idea to make sure that whatever tool you use to capture your testing, that you can pull those metrics or the stats that support those metrics. Because I've seen, maybe this touches a bit more on another topic of test management, etc. But I've seen a lot of the time that a year or 6 months down the line, somebody asks like, okay, we've agreed on these metrics, but now show me the data that supports it. And it's maybe just a follow-up step. It's always important to make sure that you gear the metadata that you capture as part of your testing efforts to show or to track the metrics that you've agreed upon to support to support or to prove that you've added value.
So AI. So I think then the next topic will be AI, adding AI in the testing space. So we get, more hands to help us with testing.
All right, thank you very much for that conversation. As always, if you're listening to this or watching this and there is something specific you want us to discuss, is there an interesting topic that you would want us to debate, or is there a specific testing challenge that you have within your organization? Please, let us know either in the comments on YouTube or send us a communication on our LinkedIn page. So until next time, thank you very much.